Next quarter we'll revisit it, she said again, and something in me finally snapped like a pencil under a thumb. My name is Adrian Cole. I'm 29, a senior consultant who's been giving away senior for free for years at Hartwell Strategy in Seattle, and I could recite my boss's raise speech the way you remember a bad jingle. Dana Carver, 41, immaculate blazers and a vocabulary of corporate weather reports, headwinds, crosswinds, tailwinds for everyone but you. Her corner office glittered with glass and Puget Sound light. The rest of us swam under fluorescence and recycled air. On that particular Tuesday, I sat across from her while she leafed through a stack of budgets I was 90% sure she hadn't read. We have to be strategic about compensation adjustments, Dana said, the word strategic doing the work of a locked door. I understand, I told her, because that's what you say when you're trained to swallow indignation and call it professionalism. Can we set an actual timeline to revisit? Now she looked up, the glass walls throwing back her reflection and a thin smile. Adrian, you need to think big picture. We're all making sacrifices. All of us except the person who had just upgraded her company Audi and posted a photo of it to LinkedIn with a caption about gratitude. I left her office with a nod and a neutral face, past Kelsey at the front desk answering 3 phones at once, past a conference room full of junior analysts practicing a deck for a client they'd never meet, past my cubicle with its leaning towers of client files and my mug that said, "It depends," which in consultancy is both joke and truth. In the garage, concrete sweating rain, I sat in my Civic and counted to 20. Then I opened my laptop at home and updated a resume I hadn't touched since Hartwell hired me. I told myself it was just to remember I had options. But the cursor on my name felt like a fuse, and I knew it. Back when I joined, Hartwell wasn't a machine. The founder, Samuel Hartwell, used to walk the floor with his sleeves rolled and a legal pad, talking to interns like they might have ideas. He hired me after a tower conversation about market signals that ended with him saying, "You've got good instincts. We can teach the rest." 6 months later, he sold to a private equity firm and moved to a vineyard. New leadership, new vocabulary. Dana arrived from a competitor with a plan to modernize operations, which to me looked a lot like replacing seasoned people with cheaper ones and putting a KPI on empathy. She was good at one thing in particular, making no sound like a business strategy. For a while, the work muted the noise. I landed Pendry Manufacturing, a legacy client we'd been chasing for years. I built out their operational model, stabilized a hemorrhaging fulfillment process, and turned them from skeptical to evangelical. Their renewal alone brought in $4 million over 2 years. My retention numbers were cartoonishly high. And every time I knocked on Dana's door with compensation in my mouth, she air-kissed it goodbye. The little warning lights had started blinking months earlier, calendar invites I used to receive forwarded to other people, development opportunities assigned to analysts who'd been here a quarter, references to legacy staff. On calls Dana assumed I wasn't on. For years in, I had apparently become a relic, effective, dependable, and priced in Dana's head as a bargain she could keep forever. The day everything tilted, I wasn't even looking for it. The phone buzzed with an unknown number while I was building a model for Pendry's Q for pricing elasticity. Adrian? Mason Weber at North Shore Analytics. Noah Kim said you're the guy to talk to. Noah and I went to grad school together. These days he ran growth projects at North Shore, Hartwell's a crosstown rival with a reputation for paying market rates and treating people like adults. I swiveled my chair slightly so my line of sight didn't include Dana pacing in her aquarium office. "I'm listening," I said. "I've watched your Pendry work from afar," Mason said, direct and unhurried. "We're expanding our strategy group. I want someone who can build relationships and build systems, not just decks. Coffee Thursday at 2. No talk of fit. No pre-screen with a recruiter. No dance. Just get in here and tell me how you think." "I'll be there," I told him. On Thursday, I took a personal day and guilt-free wore a tie I liked. North Shore's office didn't smell like old carpet and burned coffee. It smelled like someone had invested in people's hours. Sunlight. Plants that weren't half dead. A kitchenette with an espresso machine that hissed like a well-fed cat. Mason came to the lobby himself, mid-40s, shirt sleeves rolled. A quick smile that didn't feel like a tactic. "Tell me about the messiest client you've cleaned up," he said as we sat in a glass room with a view of ferries cutting white letters across the bay. "And tell me what you did wrong at first." We talked for 2 hours. Not tricks, not acronyms, work. He asked how I build trust with a skeptical ops director, how I tell a CEO their pet initiative is a bonfire, how I measure success in months 9 through 12 when everyone's bored and wants something new. He didn't look at his phone once. "The role comes with a 30% salary bump," he said, "finally, plus bonus tied to revenue you actually generate, not a scoreboard someone changes in the fourth quarter. Education budget, flex schedules, equity after 6 months. If we treat you like an owner, you'll act like one." It took me the walk back to the garage to realize my hands were shaking. Not from fear, from oxygen.
If you've been underwater a long time, sometimes breathing feels violent. Back at Hartwell, the copier was still jammed, Kelsey was still triaging, and Dana was still queen of the aquarium, backlight, and posture. But I was different. The needle had dropped on a new song. Whether I had the spine to dance was the only question. I told myself I'd give Dana one more chance.
Monday morning rain made everything shine darker. Wet leaves on the sidewalks, the sheen on Dana's car as she pulled into a reserved spot. I knocked on her doorframe and stayed until she looked up. "I'd like to set a time to talk comp," I said. "It's been a year since my last review. I've pulled market data. I'm at 23% below." She set her coffee down carefully, like gravity might be a suggestion. "We talked about this," she said. "The budget picture hasn't changed." "I'm aware. The market has." I slid 2 printouts across the desk. Survey data, anonymized ranges sources. Not a temper tantrum. A table. "Market rates are inflated," she said instantly. "Everyone's overpaying to win the news cycle. It isn't sustainable. We invest in stability." "You've said that," I answered, and heard the edge in my voice and didn't apologize for it. "I'm trying to be here long term. It's harder to face down pre-dawn flights and Saturday war rooms when you know someone across town pays your rate without speeches." "Adrian." She stood and walked to the window, hands behind her back like a headmistress. "You're not thinking strategically. You're chasing a short-term bump at the expense of a career." "What does career look like here?" I asked. Because from my chair, it looks like 4 more years of me doing senior work for junior pay while we post about culture on Instagram. She turned. The room's light made her eyes look like flattened coins. "Maybe we need to revisit whether your expectations align with a team culture. Some people need constant external validation. Others build together." It was a neat trick, and she was good at it. Frame fair pay as ego, make wanting oxygen sound like selfishness. "I'm not asking for constant validation," I said evenly. "I'm asking to be paid what it costs to do the job you want done. That's not possible right now. If that's unacceptable, maybe you should consider your fit." There it was, the velvet-wrapped shove. "I appreciate the clarity," I said. "I'll think." I didn't think. I called Mason after lunch and said yes. The offer arrived that evening, numbers that made me laugh, not because they were wild, but because they were normal and I'd forgotten normal existed. Full health coverage without picking a fight with payroll. An education budget I didn't have to beg for. A written, transparent path to promotion. Equity. Not a dream, just a workplace that assumed my time had value without me lighting a flare every quarter. I drafted a clean resignation letter, printed it on Hartwell letterhead because irony is free, and put it in a folder. The next morning, Kelsey's intercom voice was more formal than usual. "Dana would like to see you." I carried my letter with me. Dana sat with a folder open, her serious news face on. "I've been thinking about our conversation," she said, as if she were the one with the decision. And I received an interesting call from a colleague at North Shore Analytics. Apparently, they've been recruiting from our staff. "I think we need to talk about loyalty." She'd turned on the spotlight. "Fine." I slid my letter across her desk. "What's this?" "My resignation." My voice didn't shake. "I've accepted a position at North Shore. My last day in 2 weeks." Her face went through 4 changes in 3 seconds. Surprise, heat, calculation, frost. "You interviewed with a competitor while employed here?" "On my own time, using my own resources," I answered. After you told me my expectations didn't align and suggested I consider my fit. This is incredibly disappointing, Adrian. After everything we've invested in you, you're leaving for a few $1,000s?
It's more than that, I said, and we both knew it. It's about value, ownership, treating development as investment, not charity. And you think North Shore's different? They want access to our playbooks. You're opening us to risk. It's a serious accusation, I said. All company information stays with the company. You know I know that.
Nevertheless, she said, which is the word people use when they're ignoring what you said, we'll expedite your departure. Consider today your last day. Kelly will observe you packing. Your access is already revoked. Resignation turned to perp walk. Protocol. Policy. For someone who used words like culture so much, she loved a spectacle. Anything else? I asked. Yes, she said, and smiled. I'll be reaching out to Mason to provide context about your performance. The threat was not a threat. It was a statement of intent. She tried to salt the earth behind me. That's your call, I said, picking up the folder. My work speaks. 20 minutes later, I was walking to my Civic with a banker's box holding a desk plant that leaned toward light, a mug, a photo of my parents on a pier, and 4 years of late nights condensed into muscle memory and a GB of models I wasn't allowed to keep. People looked up as I passed. Some offered the half smile you give to the guy who's just learned something you already knew. Kelsey squeezed my arm when no one was looking. Congratulations, she whispered. No one says that when you leave this place. But congratulations. In the car, Relief sat with me in the passenger seat and stared out the window like a dog who knows the route to a better park. When I called Mason, I braced for the sabotage. She terminated you for resigning, he asked, genuinely surprised. Technically, she expedited my departure. Same effect. Understood. Can you start Monday instead of next week? Yes. And just to be transparent, he added, Dana called us. She wanted to talk about your performance issues. I told her we evaluate our hires ourselves. That sealed it for me, honestly. I laughed. I couldn't help it. Good to know. See you Monday, Adrian. North Shore didn't waste time. The first week, I met a partner who'd started as an analyst and still wore the same beat-up boots to the office, a project manager who'd left a brand-name firm to come here and had zero regrets, a receptionist who had a voice and used it. The work felt familiar, but the air felt different. I submitted a budget request for a small software tool I'd been paying for personally at Hartwell. It was approved in an hour with a note from finance. Thanks for thinking ahead. 6 weeks in, I knew I'd been right to jump. Then Mason walked into my office holding a folder and a question already in motion. Pendry Manufacturing, he said, and slid the folder onto my desk. My old client. The one I'd built from skeptical to stable, now backsliding under my replacement stewardship. Inside the folder, emails. Miscommunications. Missed deadlines. A slow trend toward disappointed. They reached out quietly, Mason said. They're considering making a change. They specifically asked whether you'd still be the point if they moved. They want continuity, not a logo. My chest tightened and then loosened. Pendry wasn't just revenue. Pendry was history, mornings on factory floors, coffee in paper cups, whiteboards covered in numbers that stopped bleeding. They trusted me, and trust is the only thing that travels as easily as an email. They want a full strategic package, Mason went on. Operations, competitive positioning, digitization piece you kept bugging Hartwell to let you do. I smiled. I did keep bugging them, didn't I? We can do this right, Mason said. If you want it. I wanted it. We spent a week building the proposal that would be my most comprehensive to date. Not a glossy deck, a map. Cost curve analysis to actual operations. Implementation cadence people could live through. Metrics that weren't vanity. This is what it looks like to be held, I told the team, and they got it. When you've been in a car on ice, you learn to keep your hands steady even when everything else slides. Pendry's leadership sat across from us in a room with a river view and asked the question I expected. How do we switch without breaking what still works? We build rails before we move the train, I said. We'll coordinate with Hartwell cleanly if they choose to be clean. If not, we have our own rails. They signed at the end of the meeting. $6.8 million over 3 years. An expansion into digital work I'd been sketching on napkins during flights and storing in a folder called Someday. The press release went out the following Monday. Pendry Manufacturing transitions strategic partnership to North Shore Analytics, citing innovative approach and demonstrated commitment to client outcomes and professional excellence. Business journals picked it up. People talk. They always have. Kelsey texted me a screenshot of a company-wide calendar block at Hartwell, emergency leadership meeting. Underneath, she wrote, "You didn't hear it from me." By the end of the quarter, 2 more Hartwell clients had followed Pendry. Not because I cold called, because people noticed which way the current moved when rocks were removed. Hartwell announced structural realignment and cost discipline measures. Under the paragraph of euphemisms was the real news. Dana's role eliminated, responsibilities redistributed. I didn't pour champagne. I just sat with the quiet math of things, the balance sheet where arrogance lives on the liability side. My father and mother flew out that spring. We hiked in the Cascades, and at dinner Dad asked in the way he asks when he knows the answer and wants to hear you say it. "Do you miss it?" "Parts of it," I said. "The people, the feeling of grinding through a problem and coming out the other side. But I don't miss asking to be valued." He nodded, thoughtful. 37 years in a plant will teach you more about dignity than any leadership book. Loyalty, he said, is only beautiful when it goes both ways. In the months after Pendry, life turned into something that didn't feel like breath-holding anymore. My team grew, people who didn't hoard information because they weren't terrified of scarcity. We built a shared library of templates that didn't need to be guarded like treasure because our value wasn't the template itself. It was how we knew when to throw the template away. I started a weekly session called The Aftermath, open to anyone who wanted to talk about what happens when a plan hits a messy organization. The room was always full. Hartwell faded into the background of our days like an old billboard along a route you don't take anymore. Sometimes someone would mention a name, a project, a rumor of a rumor. It wasn't vengeance, it was weather. Every now and then, news would drift in. A new CFO, a failed push into a vertical I'd once warned Dana we shouldn't touch, a celebratory post about culture with no faces on it. I didn't follow closely. I didn't need to.
What I did follow was Pendry's throughput numbers, which climbed not like a rocket, but like a tree, rooted real. The quiet victories were my favorites. A warehouse manager texting me on a Saturday morning, "We shipped on time all week." An ops director who used to look at me like I might be a consulting flu, now asking if I had a minute to talk succession planning for his team.
One afternoon, I stood on a mezzanine in their plant and watched a line that used to look like chaos run like music. No one clapped. No one had to. Work that works is its own applause. Sometime in late summer, I found myself back in the old neighborhood where Hartwell's office sat glassy and expensive above a street lined with leased cars. I don't know why I parked. Maybe I wanted to see if the building looked smaller the way your childhood school does when you revisit. In the lobby, a new receptionist I didn't know looked up without recognition. The walls had a fresh coat of paint, the art had been rotated, but the hum was the same, impressively expensive, unimpressively human. On a bench outside, a guy in a wrinkled button-down was eating lunch out of a paper bag and scrolling through job postings on his phone. He was too young to look that tired. "Good luck," I said as I walked past. He looked up, startled. "Thanks. I got it wrong for a while. Loyalty, value, the invisible line between patience and self-betrayal. I let someone tell me my ask for fair trade was a character flaw. But it turns out the simplest equations take the longest to trust. If you build, you deserve to own a piece of what you build. If you show up at 5 a.m., someone should notice. If you do the job of 3 people, you shouldn't get a team player mug. You should get paid. A year to the day after Dana's next quarter, I stood in a conference room at North Shore and presented quarterly numbers to a team that had become something I believed in. We had kept the promises we wrote in that proposal for Pendry. We'd made a few new ones and kept those too. People asked questions because they weren't afraid of the answers. Mason sat in the corner, smiling the way a builder smiles when the joists don't sag. Before we break, he said, 2 quick things. 1, Adrian's promotion to director is official as of today. There were claps, but not the performative kind. The kind people make when they think, yeah, that makes sense. And two, Mason said, this is going to embarrass him, but last week Pendry's CEO called me to say, if you ever try to move Adrian off our account, we'll hire him directly, and then we'll probably hire you. The room laughed. I told him he couldn't afford him. Later that day, I sat at my desk and looked out at Watercut by boats heading somewhere, and I wrote an email to Kelsey at Hartwell. Not to gloat. To say thank you. She'd slipped me a truth when I was packing my box. You were right, I wrote. Congratulations was the right word. She replied 10 minutes later. Always knew you'd land where the math added up. If you asked me for a secret, I don't have one. There's no twist ending hidden in a P&L. There's just this, sometimes you can be right about a place for a while and then wrong about it later, and it's okay to know both. Sometimes next quarter is just a way to turn a person into a calendar item. And sometimes the best revenge is no revenge at all, just a better morning. I still have the mug that says, it depends. It sits on my desk, a little chipped. When a junior analyst stops by to ask how to tell a client something hard without burning the room down, I pick it up and we talk about context and courage and how to know the difference between a fight and a strategy. Look, I say, if anyone tells you the budget will loosen next quarter, ask to see the line item. If they tell you to be strategic about your own worth, strategize yourself somewhere that pays for what you build. They laugh and I laugh, and then we go back to work. Real work. The kind that doesn't need a press release. The kind that knows your name.